From the New Arts and Media Studios in Milwaukee, I'm Charles Purcell. This is The Log. So we've got Super Tuesday behind us now. It's official, as though it wasn't. We've got our two candidates. We've all known this for quite a while. The election that nobody wanted ever, and they still don't want it, but there you are. Whoever said this was a democracy, one of the big campaign issues for Joe Biden and the Democrats is that we have to save democracy from the Orange Menace. Now, I'm not for 1 second going to diminish or dismiss the grave possibilities of a Orange Menace administration. I'm right on board with you. But saving democracy, I guess maybe we're saving the possibility of someday having a democracy. Let's put it that way. If we elect the Orange Menace, it's just the nail in the coffin, and we might be a full 10 generations away from anything that looks like a democracy. So that's how dire the situation is. And so I agree with the Democrats and Joe Biden on that. What I don't agree with is this idea that we have a democracy now, because it ain't even close. The representation, whether it be from the White House and its policy regarding Gaza, whether it be Congress and their attitudes, just name the issue. You just go right on down the line, and the most contested issues: abortion, gun restrictions, voter reform, election reform. Just go on and on and on, and there's no match. There's no relationship at all between what Americans want and what their legislators wind up voting on. It's like they never met. They're living in two completely different worlds. Look at the courts. Look at how the courts, especially the Supreme Court, handles its business. How do you think that relates to what the electorate wants? And of course, the electorate wants different things. We're a diverse country, and there's a political spectrum. There are lots of different ideas. So I'm not saying that we all want the same thing, but polls will tell us. And I'm wary about polls, just like you are. I know. I don't take them as gospel. But social researchers use polling all the time, and they have. And after decades and decades of repeating their work over and over, they do have something to tell us. And what they tell us is the American people aren't nearly as divided as we're sold, the idea that we're sold. You and I have talked about this many times. Even on the most contentious issues, like I said, even on abortion and gun control and Medicare for all and all the so-called socialist issues, things that are labeled socialist by the bad guys, using socialism, of course, as a dirty word. Anyway, the point being, all of these issues are agreed on by great majorities of Americans. Certainly over 50%, many times over 60%, often in the 70s, sometimes in the 80s, and even in the 90s when you come to a lot of sensible gun reform legislation. That's literally in the 90 percentile of Americans who want basic universal background checks and really, really common sense stuff. So this is all to say, quit bragging about this beautiful democracy we have. We don't have one. It's not a democracy. We don't live in a democracy. We live in an oligarchy. We live in there are lots of different names you can call it, but the bad guys are winning. The rich guys are winning. The rich guys are running everything. And what little democracy we have, we have to hang on to it. We just with every little bit of strength we have, it's stronger. The smaller you get, the stronger it gets. That's the good news. I think there absolutely is an element of democracy in local elections, school boards and town councils and city councils and local mayors. And the smaller you get, I think the more democratic you get. which is why, of course, the evil forces want to have so much control. I mean, why do you think the Koch brothers and the right movement types, they're absolutely committed to those small elections? Well, that's why. They know, they understand. So they try to nationalize. And then groups like Moms for Liberty and other sort of AstroTurf, is that what they call it? The opposite of grassroots. It's disguised as grassroots. When the Koch brothers and the Heritage Foundation and people like that put together these groups and then send them out, and they train people at a local level. So it looks like a that's what Moms for Liberty is. And a lot of these groups you'll find on the right, they're AstroTurf organizations. They're not democratic. They're not grassroots. They're not from the bottom up. No, they're invented wholly by the big guys in the corporate CEO penthouse suites, in their big conference rooms up there on the 38th floor. Yeah, they're invented, and then they're sprinkled around into these small areas. So no, that's not democracy. But my point being, the smaller you get, the more chance you get of actually having a bit of democracy. So I hold out hope, but we don't have a democracy right now. All right, let's look at what we got going on. Well, the government shutdown has been averted again, and that's the whole. It hardly gets a mention in the news anymore. Oh yeah, well we're a day away from a government shutdown again, for the third time in 6 weeks. It's a boy who cried wolf kind of situation. So I'm not even sure how to cover that or talk about it. We're set now for another few weeks before the next deadline comes. So let's just, I've gotten to the point of not really worrying about that. And I know one of their games is to get me numb. Well, maybe it's working a little bit on this one, because I don't really believe anybody anymore when they threaten a government shutdown. It happened again. It's going to happen again in another few weeks. But for the moment, there's nothing to worry about. So there's that. Latest on Gaza, there's nothing too much to report except that it's just as horrible as it ever was. A food aid convoy in northern Gaza was looted after the there was a delay at an Israeli checkpoint, which is, the Israelis have got to they've got to meet their responsibility. They're alone. They're 100% alone in the world community, except for the United States, which is a pretty big partner to have. So, I'm reading now from, I guess, what am I reading from? The Guardian. A new drive by the United Nations World Food Program to deliver aid to an estimated 500,000 people at risk of famine in northern Gaza has failed amid further scenes of chaos and violence. A 14-truck convoy destined for northern Gaza was looted this week after being held at an Israeli army checkpoint for several hours, aid workers said. As the convoy turned back after the delay, it was attacked and 200 tons of food looted by a large crowd of desperate people. Well, hopefully some of those desperate people at least got what they needed. God almighty. So, with nothing especially new or interesting to say, it's just as bad as it ever was and getting worse on a daily basis. And there's starvation and anything other than ethnic cleansing and genocide. I don't know how you use any other words. It is what they are. And it's what's happening. So that continues. And Vice President Kamala Harris's words notwithstanding, when it sounded like she was calling for a ceasefire. She used the strongest language from the administration yet. I guess it was recent. Was it last weekend? I forget exactly when it happened. It was the anniversary, their annual walk on the what used to be the Edmund Pettus Bridge, commemoration of Bloody Sunday. It's now the John Lewis Bridge. In her address at the event, she called for a ceasefire, and it made some headlines. But then the administration kind of walked it back, and they said, well, define exactly what you mean. And she really wasn't saying anything different than they've said before, that it's when they really are forced to define what she meant by ceasefire, I guess what she really meant was, a temporary pause, which is what they've been saying all along. So it really wasn't the headline that we thought it was. And my first reaction was, if if the administration really is calling for a ceasefire, that's awfully big news. I mean, that's really big news. And why in the hell is it the vice president saying it? Those words need to come out of the mouth of the president, if that's really what they mean. Well, it was only a couple days later that I learned, oh, okay, well, that's why he didn't say it, because they weren't really calling for a ceasefire. She used the actual word, but, politicians. I'm no fan of Kamala Harris. I don't think she's the devil incarnate like the Republicans want you to think. But I'm no fan of hers. When it was primary season back in 2020, she was very low on my list. As I did a program at the time, I kind of ranked all of the Democratic hopefuls, and there were many at the time. Joe Biden was at the very bottom of that list, and I think Kamala Harris was maybe only one spot up. So I'm not fans of these people. But as I've said many times, politics is a team sport. And you can't just get wrapped up in individuals. And the Biden administration, for better or worse, and I think it's mostly for better. Let me give them some props at the moment here. It's like I said, it's a team sport. They've got cabinet members, they've got secretaries, we got deputy secretaries, we got heads of agencies, we got advisors, we got a whole army of people in there. And for the most part, I mean, given with the exception. I mean, yeah, they're all capitalists, so of course I oppose them in that regard. But they are grown-up adult people doing grown-up adult jobs, and they're trying to do their best for the country. I don't really have many doubts about that. So, yeah, you want to call me naive? Go ahead. I disagree with them about almost everything. But this is the whole, not afraid to debate and to be a loyal opposition. I'm the loyal opposition to the Democrats. I disagree with almost everything they do. But I concede the fact that they're serious people trying to do their best for the most part. With some exceptions, and there are always exceptions. So that's where we are there. In news this week, since last we spoke, Kyrsten Sinema, I love this. She's decided not to run for her seat, which is great for everybody. Independent from Arizona. Of course, she ran 6 years ago as a Democrat, and she won, of course, and then we had to put up with her BS for 6 years. At some point, just recently in the last year or so, she switched party affiliation to and declared herself as an independent. But she announced on Tuesday of this week that she will retire from the Senate rather than run for re-election. Reading from Salon magazine, Sinema, who left the Democratic Party in 2022 after facing an internal backlash for siding with the Senate GOP on the filibuster rule they used to kill major pieces of President Joe Biden's agenda, announced her decision to a video posted to Twitter. Here, I love this quote if you haven't heard it. "Because I choose civility, understanding, listening, working together to get stuff done, I will leave the Senate at the end of this year. Compromise is a dirty word. We've arrived at that crossroad, and we chose anger and division. I believe in my approach, but it's not what America wants right now." Okay, so talk about sanctimonious, take the high road, or put yourself on the high road, that is, undeservedly. Yeah, well, she's right about one thing. America doesn't want her, and it's why she's not running. If she were leading in the polls, you think she'd be dropping out? Of course not. She has no chance. There's a Democrat in the race. There's a Republican in the race. Democrat being Representative Ruben Gallego, and the Republican being Carrie Lake, who last time ran for governor. She's a MAGA Republican. So between the three of them, Sinema didn't have a ghost of a chance. There was no way she was going to win. So that's why she's dropping out. And as far as wanting civility and understanding and listening and working together, well, she was just a corporate shill, and she was a buddy with Joe Manchin, and sabotaged everything that Joe Biden tried to do. And speaking myself as a lefty, there was a moment there when it looked like Joe Biden was going to do the right thing, and the whole Build Back Better and all of that. It looked like, he had the backing of the squad and of Bernie, and there were things that looked like could happen. The Build Back Better was trillions of dollars, literally. I mean, we hadn't seen this kind of spending since FDR. The voting rights legislation, which never happened, looked like it may have a shot. But time after time, Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema just made it impossible because the margins were just too small in the Senate, and Joe Biden needed every one of them. And he got the progressives on board. The progressives played ball. They were very practical. The aforementioned squad and AOC and Joe Biden and, Bernie Sanders. The progressives got on board, were just downright practical about things, getting a lot of what they wanted and, of course, much of what they didn't. The Joe Biden and the centrist Democrats are never going to give the progressives everything they want, but this is basic politics. And I understand sometimes you have to compromise. When I holler about not compromising, it's about not compromising with the crazy off-the-cliff MAGA, right-wing, fascist Nazi types. Yeah, there's a limited spectrum. You can't just negotiate with everybody. You have to have some limits. There are some people that cross the line. So, yeah, I'm often sort of accused of not wanting to compromise. I understand political compromise, but everybody's got to be at least on the same page. You got to agree that the sky is blue and that the grass is green. I mean, and you have to agree that people shouldn't just die by the thousands or millions just to prove your point, like they did during the pandemic. I mean, there are limits, and what was happening while Sinema and Manchin were sabotaging everything, the limits of that argument were acceptable to me, but they weren't having it. Now, any one of the senators, Bernie Sanders could have done exactly what Manchin and Sinema did. Any one of the senators could, because they had that slim margin of 0, right? It was 50-50 tie, with the tiebreaker going to Kamala Harris if it came to that. So that meant that every single senator had the same power that Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin had, but none of them decided to use that power because they weren't dicks. Sinema and Manchin, who are now gone, bye-bye, thanks for your service, they're the only two who decided to take advantage of that position. Any one of the senators could have just sabotaged any legislation they wanted just to get headlines or to impress their donors, their funders, which is what Sinema was doing. She became just such a corporate shill. So bye-bye, Kyrsten Sinema, bye-bye. What else? Okay, well, Super Tuesday. McConnell. Now that Super Tuesday has happened and it's official, that the Orange Menace is the nominee. Mitch McConnell, the greatest villain one of the greatest villains in American history, just flat out. Certainly the greatest villain of Congress. Forever, maybe. Certainly in my lifetime, in a generation. He packed the courts with unqualified right-wing judges, just up and down the federal bench. Radical right-wingers. And, of course, he's solely responsible for Roe v. Wade, the Dobbs decision. He's solely responsible for everything the court is up to now because he literally stole 2 seats, the one he stole from Merrick Garland and then tossing in a ramming through Amy Coney Barrett. While after they say that not too close to elections, people had actually begun to vote. People had been voting for weeks because of early voting and mail-in voting. We weren't close to election. We were actually in the midst of an election. It was happening when they shoved her through. So he stole 2 seats, and you might even say 3, because Mitch McConnell is also the person who swept aside the 60-vote rule for confirming judges. So without that, Kavanaugh, I like beer Kavanaugh, never would have been approved by the Senate without that 60-vote threshold being trashed. So yeah, Mitch McConnell. Oh, and then the icing on the cake. Mitch McConnell is singularly responsible for the fact that the Orange Menace still exists politically. He had the power to vote guilty on the second impeachment, and if he had done so, he would have given permission to a few other Republicans who certainly would have voted guilty, and the Orange Menace would have been forever banned from ever running again. So Mitch McConnell, I don't know where you rank him in the history of American villains. Give that some thought. Who's worse than Mitch McConnell? And now, after everything, after he comes out, because of course he's still in Congress, he won't be the minority leader. I guess he still is. He won't be after November, so we got him for another 8 months. He endorses the Orange Menace. After all that, after everything. So shameless, absolutely shameless, these people. Yeah, this is the democracy we live in, you guys. Yeah, we live in a democracy. Yeah, right. No, we don't. Okay. And then, by way of endorsement, my God, Nikki Haley, her quote. Let me find it. Let me see. Where is it? She didn't endorse the Orange Menace after her losses of Super Tuesday. By the way, when it was all said and done, she won Vermont. She won the District of Columbia. And she got anywhere between sometimes 15, 16, 17, 18%, all the way up to sometimes 30%, 40% plus in several states. So she wound up with a number of voters who the pundits are very interested in now, and I am too, wondering where they go for the general election. Not all of the Haley voters will go to the Orange Menace in the general election. So that's interesting to know. And her endorsement, if and when she endorses him, really, I don't think means much. It's not like they were married to her. They voted for her. Maybe they liked her. They saw her as an alternative to the Orange Menace, of course. That's the main reason. She was the last person standing against him. But she doesn't have a movement. She's not a movement candidate. She's not a cult candidate. So I don't think her endorsement means anything. I can't find the exact quote. Okay, I'm not going to look anymore. But basically she said that now it's time for the Orange Menace to earn the votes of those who voted against him. And this is a quote. I remember this for sure. I hope he does that. I think at one point she also said she wished him well. After everything she said about him, I hope he does that. I hope he earns the votes of those who voted against him. And that means her. So that was not an endorsement, but it was definitely opening the door wide open for an endorsement. And she can say, well, he earned, after I said all those terrible things about him, and once the general election campaign began, he earned my vote. Yeah. Just shameless. While we're speaking of shame on my hometown of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, who's going to host the Nazi convention, the fascist MAGA GQP convention. Shame on you, Milwaukee. Shame on you. Yeah, I know their money's as good as anybody's, but yeah, you're going to take their money? You're going to give them a platform just for the sake of sheer decency. How do you put all these people downtown Milwaukee in Fiserv Forum, the home of our beloved champion Milwaukee Bucks, and let them broadcast their bile to the world? Shame on Mayor Cavalier Johnson. Shame on the city of Milwaukee. Just unacceptable. Okay, so here we are at the election that nobody ever wanted. I mean, what did you expect from Joe Biden? Nobody wanted him in 2020. He was foisted upon the electorate by the Democratic establishment when they orchestrated. Everybody dropped out. Everybody but Bernie. The Democratic voters wanted Bernie Sanders, but the Democratic establishment just wouldn't have it. Twice, in 2016 and in 2020. And the Democratic establishment just put the kibosh on Bernie Sanders. And they orchestrated with all the other candidates to drop out right before South Carolina in 2020, and the establishment put their thumb on the scale for Joe Biden, who nobody wanted, but they thought, okay, well, he's the one we like, as the establishment says, and we think he can win, and there it was, done deal. Yeah, but we live in a democracy. No, not even close. So nobody wanted Joe versus the Orange Menace in 2020. Nobody wants it now, even less so. Ezra Klein has a podcast that's not bad. And if you want to go back and listen, check out, I think the dates would have been, the first week of March, maybe, last week of February. A couple weeks, actually. He does a couple of episodes on what if it's not Joe Biden. He did a pretty big, interesting what if couple of podcasts on what if Joe decided not to run after all. When LBJ famously said, I will not run and I will not serve, or whatever that quote was, he decided not to run. That was in March, late March. And well, it's not going to happen. Let's not dream. It probably should. Joe is the, as I've been thinking of him now, Ruth Bader Biden. Just stuck around way too long. I got no time for Joe. And yeah, give me all of his accomplishments. I know I've heard all of his accomplishments. Show me. I mean, where are the results? The Democrats are famous for passing this huge legislation, but all it ever is a bunch of tax incentives and write-offs. It's a handout to major corporations and say, okay, now you guys go do it. So whether it's the infrastructure bill or the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, it's just tossing money at the private sector and saying, here, well, we'll give you incentives to go do the right thing. And we never really see it. Most of the money, half of it we saw, oh my God, we saw this in the pandemic. We saw that just huge percentages of the funds went right in the pockets of people who are already too rich to live. So yeah, once you just toss the money in the form of incentives and tax breaks to the private sector in order to do what you want what you think is the right thing, build this bridge and renovate that hospital. And it all looks so damn good on paper. And it never really reaches people. And in the meantime, grocery prices are still kind of high. And that's all people vote on. And the people are dumb as stumps. So they think that the government has anything to do with that. Anyway. So nobody wants this election. I don't want it. All right. So I hope I wasn't too curmudgeonly for you today. And as always, I wish you well, and I wish this country well and this world well. And we don't live in a democracy, and I'd like to. I'd like to live in a democracy. I really would love that. Thanks to our flagship terrestrial station, River West Radio, riverwestradio.com. This and all of the other episodes of all of the podcasts can be found at the website, charlespurcell.com, or just find us on your favorite platform. Write to me, charlespurcell@gmail, follow on Facebook, and thanks to Peter Donalds, who wrote and performed our theme song. Okay, this is The Log. I'm Charles Purcell. See ya.